There we go. Okay. So it's a great pleasure today to welcome Stuart Blaney, who's going to talk to us with us about his work uh, on primarily on Jacques Rancière and also the figure of Louis-Gabriele Gauny, who is an independent sort of figure in his own right, but also features very much in the work of Jacques Rancière. Stuart
Yes.
completed the MA in Continental Philosophy with us a few years ago, that some of you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
really enjoyed my time there doing the MA.
good. always nice to always nice to hear. You stayed around for a little bit, so I assumed that you had enjoyed it because Stuart then stayed on to
Yeah.
do a PhD.
PhD. Yeah.
Completed you completed your PhD was 2022, was that correct? 2 years ago?
22. Yeah. 2 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
2 years
yeah.
ago. Yeah.
And on the back of his PhD, Stuart then wrote a book entitled Equality and Freedom in Rancière and Foucault, which has, with brilliant timing, literally been published today. So there we go. Couldn't.
Well, I could go along with that. It's actually yesterday, but we could
Oh,
pretend it's
okay.
today. But yeah, yesterday.
All
So
right.
yeah,
Okay.
almost immaculate timing.
Almost. Okay.
But yeah, almost. Yeah.
Um, it's
So,
near enough for a philosopher, anyway. The
yeah.
so great, and that book, Equality and Freedom in Rancière and Foucault, is
Mm.
obviously available now in all good bookstores, or no doubt online somewhere, and
Yeah.
it's published by Bloomsbury Press. So
Bloomsbury. Yeah.
well done to Stuart for doing that, and it's I can vouch for the fact that it's a really interesting read. So we're going to talk a little bit about Rancière um, and Gauny, the paper in particular that Stuart shared with us in advance. The title of which I've gone and left somewhere, so I can't remember exactly how it goes. Stuart,
It's politics and aesthetics. Jacques Rancière and Louis Gabriel. Something like that, I think.
thank you. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. That's
It's
my
all
bad.
right. That's great.
And what we'll do is I'm going to talk uh, with Stuart about that for some minutes. We'll see. And just to ask a few preliminary questions, really, just to start getting a feel for what's going on in that work and what it is in the work of Rancière and respect to Gauny and so on that really interests Stuart. And then we'll open the floor to questions. So please do, uh, if you have any questions on having read the paper, then that would be absolutely great. But also, of course, just if anything comes to mind that you'd like to ask uh, over the next 20 minutes or so, then that's great too. And we'll have every opportunity to talk through those things. Uh, we don't have exactly a set time for these events, but it's usually somewhere between about an hour to an hour and a half max. We'll just see how we go. So that's just to give you an idea. So yeah, okay. So Stuart, I think as I said already, I mean, as it's clear from the work which you shared with us, this is really about two figures,
Yeah.
Gauny and also Jacques Rancière. Uh, Gauny sort of comes to our attention largely because of Rancière's work. I mean,
Uh,
he
a
has
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
No one see. Yeah, we wouldn't know Gauny. Yeah.
So perhaps we should start a little bit with Rancière. And can you just tell us very sort of briefly a little bit about him, about his work, just
Mm.
situate him a little bit. Who are we talking about here? And where was he writing? What was his primary interest? Just tell us a little bit about Jacques Rancière.
Okay. So, if for those of you who've read the paper, this is fleshed out in more detail than what I'm about to say. But basically, like many famous French thinkers, he was like originally a communist thinker in the 60s, and like Michel Foucault, he was a student of Louis Althusser, and like Foucault, he moved away from Althusser, away from communism. Unlike Foucault, the reason he moved away from Althusser was because of Althusser and the French Communist Party's reaction to May 68. To Rancière, May 68 was something, it was an event. But Althusser, as I'm sure maybe many of you know, it was nothing, right? Because it wasn't part of his like understanding of how a revolution should occur according to communism and so on and so forth. And we know that the Communist Party in France called it Petit Bourgeois Revolution, right? So just after May 68, that's when he split with Althusser. And he was quite extreme. He went on to like communist Maoism then and so on. But he eventually left. And like in the early 70s, like many French thinkers, he started to move completely away from communism and that particular understanding of political revolution. And like Foucault before him, he turned to the archives and he turned to aesthetic practices as a means of revolution. And this is why he calls these forms of emancipation, as well as the emancipation of the work of poets like Gauny that he draws from, as an aesthetic revolution. So in a crude nutshell, he's someone who's moved from ideas of communist revolution, a dialectic, thesis, antithesis, supposition, if we use the Hegelian terms, onto an understanding of a non-dialectic emancipation, where revolving on the axis of equality, like Foucault revolves on the axis of freedom, it's an equality that's not deferred in a dialectic, an equality to come. It's equality that happens here and now in two forms, as practices and as a presupposition. Now, should I stop there, David, or you want me to start fleshing out presuppositions?
No, that's a great start, and I'm just thinking, well, there'll be lots to talk about. So let's just sort of find our way into that. I mean, you were just touching on a point there, which I think is, I know it's really important for Rancière and for your reading of Rancière and Gauny and so on. You were just touching on it there, and that's the idea of equality as a supposition, because we're perhaps used in political philosophy and philosophy generally, perhaps we're used to thinking about equality as something to be achieved, to work towards, or possibly as a condition for a certain kind of life or something. But that's not the way that Rancière is approaching it, is it? Because perhaps just tell us some more about that idea of equality as a supposition and what that's what is that really about for him, and why is it so important?
So on the chance of being a pedant, David, I'll slightly correct you. It's a presupposition.
Presupposition. Okay. All right.
Semantics. So if you look at the work, that archival work, from him looking at the work of poets, Gauny being the star of the show, so to speak, that fleshes out for him an understanding of an aesthetic equality. And by aesthetics, he doesn't mean the study of beauty or art. He means the study of basically how the sensible is configured, okay? How we make sense of that which we sense, right? So he talks about there's an equality. We can get these worker poets who also have the equal ability to create. More famously, his equality is shown to derive from his book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, and the 19th century pedagogue, Joseph Jacotot, who talks about an equality of intelligence. So in Rancière's work, the two come together: a quality of intelligence, a quality of aesthetics, the ability to create, and that he makes as a presupposition of equality. So therefore, equality is not deferred in a dialectic. It happens here and it happens now as a presupposition where you do not demand equality, you presuppose it. So this sounds all a bit abstract. So if we just ground this, Todd May in his book on Rancière gives a great example, the civil rights movement. So African Americans went to white-only establishments, sat there and ordered food. They presupposed their equality to be there and to order food. And that's an example of a presupposition. You can also see presuppositions in the work of poets, for example, Gauny, with the outrageously bad education he had, he became autodidactic and became a published poet, which for someone who comes from that background is amazing. Yeah. So there's this presupposition of equality there, that I'm a worker, but I can still do this. I can publish poetry, I can learn, and so on. So presupposition of equality is not a deferred equality. It's not equality as an ideal, okay, an equality to come. It's an equality as a practice. And that's why my work focuses on emancipation as an everyday practice rather than these grand events of, I don't know, storming the Winter Palace or whatever, right? So you presuppose equality. I am equal, and you act accordingly.
Okay. I think I'm sure we're going to come back to this point because it really leads to a very different way of thinking about
100%,
what a political act is, and what an act of freedom indeed is, what freedom can be as a practice. But I want to just connect it for a moment to the to the point about an aesthetic equality that you were speaking about there, the idea of an aesthetic movement, and connect it also to this idea of dissensus, which is very much part of Rancière's thinking. As it seems to me that these ideas sort of are very tightly connected in his thinking.
Intrinsically,
freedom as presupposition
of equality,
aesthetic revolution, and or movement, and dissensus. Again, dissensus, striking word, because philosophers, being on the whole a fairly reasonable bunch, you tend to think they're always looking for consensus, always trying to find something. But no, dissensus is what we're looking for here. Dissensus is the key thing for Rancière. So put these terms into relation.
Okay. So I'll talk away, and when I stop, if you need me to unpack it, if it's too dense, please let me know. So let's start with dissensus. So dissensus is a neologism Rancière creates. Every great philosopher has at least one or two neologisms, and he takes this word from the Latin dissensus, which means disagreement. But in his own lexicon, it's like a disruption of the common world, the world we live in, which he calls consensus. Okay, it's a transgression, a disruption. Okay, for example, we go back to Todd May, civil rights movement. That's a form of dissensus, right? There's a consensus, white-only establishment, and you're transgressing that. You're disrupting that by presupposing equality. Okay, now he's got two key terms: aesthetics and politics. Okay, politics is fairly straightforward to describe, because basically politics is the enactment of dissensus. That's a very concise, accurate description of Rancière's lexical understanding of politics. It's the enactment of dissensus. Okay. Now, aesthetics is a bit harder, and I need to unpack this a little bit. I kind of touched on it earlier. So, again, I'll give you a very nice, succinct definition. Aesthetics for Rancière is, I mentioned this earlier, the configuration of the sensible, right? So basically, the sensible is a way of the world around us, that which we sense. Okay, so this is why Rancière states in a 2016 interview, the name of which escapes me, that aesthetics is one's relationship with the perceived world. Okay, so Rancière also talks about, famously, he mentions this term a lot, the distribution of the sensible. Now, for Rancière, in the consensus, the distribution of the sensible is a socially stratified aesthetics. It's the sharing out and division of space and time, and our place and role within that space and time. So you can kind of think of it as a kind of normative ontology, if you like. Obviously, if it's normative, it's taxonomic as well. Yeah, your taxonomy will put you in a certain role and place within the distribution of space and time, the distribution of the sensible. Okay, so that's aesthetics. So if aesthetics is a configuration of the sensible, emancipation-wise, we can use aesthetics to reconfigure the sensible that's imposed upon us, that space, that time, and that role. Okay, so for him, aesthetics intrinsically links to politics, acts of dissensus, by transfiguring the sensible, okay, to create other times, other spaces, and to experience the self as other. So a key word I would say here is experience. You experience other times and spaces and the self as other. You don't necessarily change them where they stay changed, but you reconfigure them in this moment of dissensual experience of the other. So another space-time, and if you like, being as well, if you want to use in it like ontological language. And that, in a nutshell, is how those three terms interact, which, along with a presupposition of quality, is the core of his philosophy, which is basically an offering of emancipation.
It a couple of thoughts about that. One is that again, for a philosophy which is very openly and deliberately political in its orientation, the idea of what I think we could call a political act here, such as the act of dissensus, an aesthetic act, as you've described it there. It doesn't sit on a sort of spectrum, which again we're rather familiar with, between sort of revolution, change everything, the radical gesture, and at the other end, sort of gradualism, just something. Well, we just go very incrementally. We just go very carefully. We just one thing at a time. That sort of approach. And I imagine you'll say that it doesn't sit on the spectrum between those two, because they both of those are oriented towards some future condition. They're oriented towards some future goal, really. Whereas
they're telic, right?
Go back to what you were saying before about freedom as a presupposition, then it's just about an immediate practice. So that was just one sort of reflection on this. But I wondered if you'd, when thinking about the possibility of a different experience as you described. How close do you think this is to just an experience of art that we might have if we go to a gallery or something, where we see something, we see art and we go, wow, and we, if only for a minute or two, our usual assumptions about how the world is put together and how it makes sense are shaken up and maybe given a little different. We're at least opened to a different configuration of experience and something. I just my I've got a kind of secondary part to that question. So in all fairness,
Okay.
I'll ask you, I'll let you know that as well, rather than bringing
Yeah.
it on in a minute. The It's because the gallery experience, it seems very close to what you're describing, but it's the sort of it's the experience of the spectator. It's the one where I go to the gallery,
Yeah.
I have an experience, I
Mm.
look at something, or I walk into an
Mm.
installation, and something happens or not, who knows.
Mm.
Whereas the emphasis on everything which Rancière is talking about, as I understand it, and we'll get on very shortly to talk about Gauny when it's clearly is the case, is on doing things
Yeah.
rather than just like art having some being around and doing something to us.
Yeah.
I wondered, how does that work? How close is it to that experience of art that we might have?
Well, first of all,
What
David,
else is missing from there? Why is that maybe not enough?
to be truthful, I've never actually thought to that. So it's a great observation. Knee-jerk reaction to that would be, yeah, if when you go to an art gallery, I mean, for me personally, when it was at the Tate Modern a long time ago, the work of Rothko, for me, it's suspended time and space. Yeah, I was in that timeless moment. Yeah, I know some people don't like Rothko, but there you go. So there's that, but you are a spectator to a degree.
Mm.
Now, in many ways, Rancière is anti-Aristotle, right? Because of the whole idea of things being everything for Aristotle is telic, right?
Yeah.
For Rancière, it's autotelic. Maybe we can go back to that later and unpack that. But for now, he's similar to in Aristotle in the sense that in Nicomachean Ethics he talks about the practices that you create you, right?
Mm.
And Rancière says you are what you do. Foucault as well, he's all about discursive, non-discursive practices. Practice we create us,
Mm.
and then he goes on to practices of freedom, right? So this is all about aesthetic practices. So you are what you do. So this is very much about what you do, what you create in creating these other spaces and times, and other you as well.
Mm.
So you're not really, as David quite rightly says, a spectator. You are a doer. Can I use that? Or better, you are an artist, a worker, poet, right? Because
Mhm.
don't forget the word poet stems from the Greek etymon, which means creator. Like the etymon for poetry means creation, right? So it's all about creating. That's where aesthetics comes in
Mm.
to play again.
Which takes us on very well to Gauny and the idea of the worker poet,
Yeah.
precisely. So yeah, I mean, you introduced the figure of Gauny very well, I think, and in the paper. So
Okay.
we might want to say a word or two about him as a figure, but maybe not
Mm.
well too long, just in order to leave time to
Okay.
talk about all the other things that we can talk about. But he was a 19th century living in Paris worker, just picking up bits and pieces of work where he could. As he described in the paper, he took up the skill of laying parquet floors because that was something which
Yeah.
was just a little bit better somehow in ways that maybe you want to enlarge on than just sort of unskilled labor. But it was very irregular, and then a lot of the interest then comes about how he turns that into something really
Mm.
significant and positive, rather than just
Mm.
being a very difficult kind of form of life. Um, and one of the things which is involved in that is this idea of a double life, which I think you were just
Yeah.
just alluding to there. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is just a series of prompts, really, Stuart. Tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about Gowning, um, and this idea of the work of poet and that kind of creative aspect of his life, and how it's kind of mapped onto this idea of a double life. Really, that's something
Yeah.
which I think
So
is interesting.
yeah. So Rancière gets this idea of life as a double. So just staying with Rancière, if you talk about aesthetic revolution, you're existing in between uh, conformity and the extremes of conformity, right, and the extremes of political revolution, right, storming the streets, the Winter Palace, as I said earlier, as a little analogy. So you're in between. So you're neither conforming fully, or you're not having this like coup, if you like. So you've got this double. You've got the consensual self that looks after your biological body. You need to work. You need to live. You need to eat, clothe yourself, and you've got this essential self, okay, which is forming your own particular way of being. And Gauny encapsulates the two of these himself, like we could use the term, if you like an amphibian, yeah, in two worlds. So that's where we get the term worker poet. He's a worker, but he's also a poet. In that poetry, he becomes like autodidactic, like the other worker poets, which is a key term for Rancière, because it shows that supposition of an equality of intelligence that links with Joseph Jacotot that we mentioned earlier. So you've got this life as a double, and the reason that Gauny did like rather than a 9 to 5, he got paid for the work that he did, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but the guy I mentioned at the end of the paper, Patrick Singolani, mentions it's a means of escape from subordination, right? So you're out away from the panoptic gaze of the foreman in the the factories of the 19th century. You have a freedom. You're still exploited by the way you're paid, but there's a freedom of sorts, and that gives time for Gauny to daydream at times and to escape the monotony and of the job, and to create his own space and time. But also because he's self-employed, he gets certain days without work. So on a work day while everyone else is working, he's creating his own time, because in the time of work he's not working, and he's walking through different parts of Paris that are maybe very affluent. So he's creating his own space at the same time, walking through Paris when other people are working. So he creates this life as a double, and where he's not fully a poet, not fully a worker, but kind of both together in this essential life. I don't know if that makes sense, David. I don't know if that was clear
Yeah.
enough.
No, it does. It does. And I mean, in one sense, in being both of these figures at the same time, a worker and a poet, he's he's uh, he he's obviously not conforming to
Yeah,
the expected categories according to which one is either a worker or a poet. You're not supposed to be
yeah,
both, right?
yeah.
So,
Plato would tell us that too.
yeah, indeed. um, so actually, there's a sense in, because one could begin thinking about that as if he's saying, as if he's just taking an opportunity to, he's sort of splitting himself in two to go, well, I have to conform here. I mean, as you said, you have to look after your
Biological
livelihood, be
needs.
able to earn enough to eat and so on. So you can say, well, there's an area of conformity in his life, and say, well, I'm just going to do this, and then in the moments where he can not avoid doing that and create other opportunities for himself, then he could be something else. And it is a curious sort of division, I think, which I can imagine for some people being a little bit uncomfortable in the sense that you're supposed to be authentic, you're supposed to be one thing, you're supposed to decide what you are, it's supposed to be this or you're supposed to be that, you know. But actually, it's precisely in doing that that
Mm.
he does some of that making and that disrupting that you're talking about, because he is disrupting the expectations and the categories according to which our time and our space is divided up and for us, and we're supposed to be doing this, so we're supposed to be doing that, and then we use it. And so it's actually not only a, or not even, not, yeah, not only, let's say, a a way of sort of gaining marginal advantage, if you like, within the demands of a certain working
Mm.
life and a certain the demands of what that brings. But it's also
But
actually a
mm,
disruption of that. It's also a creation of something else, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, he's disrupting the ways of being of the taxonomy imposed upon him as a
Mm,
worker, right? He's not
mm,
living up to those expectations, and he's pushing past those boundaries,
mm,
um, and the boundaries of space and time. But it's important, which the essay states, right, to understand, contextualize this, right? So Rancière, in his archival research, says, look, you've got this political philosophy that says that workers want, you know, excuse my bad French pronunciation, but I'll give it a go. Liberté, equalité, fraternité, right? Terrible French, but you understand. And
mm,
he said, but no, that's not true. They haven't got these big ideals, right? That's what the
mm,
theorists want. That's what the philosophers want. They just say, you know what? I'm tired of being poor. I don't
mm,
want to be poor. And if you know what, I'm tired of work. If I can stop being poor, that's great. But if I can stop being poor and working, that's even better. And that's
mm,
all they wanted, right?
mm,
Now, when they had revolutions, these grand revolutions, they weren't like, right, yeah, freedom, equality. It was a hardship for them, you
mm,
know. People like Saint-Simon and Charles Fourier started
mm.
their movements because of the hardships they received from the French Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And it, so they're like, well, what can we do? These revolutions are so harsh. We can't change things. So instead of working on a change of the government, we're going to work on a change of the self. And this is when it becomes very much like Foucault's kind of like a care of the self.
Mm,
Okay. It's very Foucauldian in that sense. As you know, in the book, David, I mean, you were my supervisor. I link the two. They're
mm,
very much a care of the self, practices
mm,
of the self. So this is where they were coming from, right? We've seen what revolution is like. It's horrific, okay? And for Rancière, much like Foucault, and some might disagree, revolution makes it mainly only cause like a shift in power. And if there's any Marxists amongst us, communists say the same about the French Revolution and the American Revolution. It was merely a shift from the power of like feudal aristocracy
mm,
to bourgeois capitalism. Okay,
mm,
just a shift. Okay, so they seem to realize this and say, well, what can we do? We can't change the government. Revolution surrenders. We can change ourselves. We can work on ourselves, and we can live in this like middle path between, you know, the two extremes of conformity and a
mm,
revolution. So contextually, okay, that's where they're coming from. Their
mm,
disappointment with socialist utopian movements. And Rancière in the 70s, you know, looking back at it, the French Communist Party, communism, uh, and so on, were disappointed at that same time. They
mm,
mirrored each other, okay? And I would argue, and others might say not, that we've got a reflection of that now in the period we are of like gig economy and neoliberalism, where people are stepping that middle path in between. Because again, people might argue, but revolutions don't seem to work, right? The whole of the 20th century has shown us
mm,
like a vast, huge failure in revolutions. Okay,
mm,
even the most ardent of communists like Zizek says the same. So there's that middle path where we can be a worker poet, right? We have to look after our biological body in the world of biopolitics, as Foucault would say. But then we've got this poet side to ourselves. We step this path of a double. And this is what Foucault says as well, right? You know, you get your normative self and you take from that normative self and create other selves, right? Foucault says the same. So this is, for people like Foucault and Rancière, this is their experiment with aesthetic forms of emancipation, with their disappointment of political revolutions that tend not to work and tend to be just a shift in power. Okay, so that's a bit of a long-winded answer, I think, maybe, David, but that's kind of contextualizing the idea of the double.
All very interesting, and thank you. Look, there's lots of other questions I could talk about, but I'll stop there because I want to give everyone else a chance to ask a few questions and to open the discussion up. So thank you very much for that. I think you give us a really, I mean, with the paper and then that kind of enlarging as you have very helpfully there on a lot of the key ideas. I think we've got a pretty good sense of what Rancière and is doing and the reasons for his interest in Gauny and what the figure of Gauny can tell us, or some of the things it can tell us, and some of the questions it can put our way as well, I suppose. So with that, let me hand over to our esteemed guests. And as we don't have a large crowd here, I think rather than using the chat box and things, just stick your hand up or start speaking, and we'll take it from there. I'm sure that'll be fine. Matt, thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi, Matt.
Hi. I actually haven't studied yet Foucault or any of the other people you mentioned, I think. So I can't really go there. However, from a practical from a philosophical perspective, I like the idea of dissensus. I've never heard of it before. That's fascinating.
Oh, okay.
What does Rancière say? Surely, if you practice dissensus, you're assuming that what you want to bring about is the case. If you're then challenged, am I right in thinking if I'm someone who's fighting for a certain right, I just assume I have that right and act as if I have that right? Was that the right understanding of dissensus?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, that's quite. I mean, if you take openly, I mean, if you go to extremes, I mean, and like let's take the civil rights movement. Yeah, people were violence and arrests were inflicted upon those people. So dissensus can be dangerous. Yeah. It cannot be dangerous. Like Gauny is just going for these like strolls through the Paris on days meant for work and so on. But in certain cases, it can be. Or if we use a modern example, for example, do you know the lying flat movement in China? Does anybody know that? In Chinese, it's tamping. No? Okay. Anyway, so these people are saying in China, right, there's this real culture. You do lots of overtime, you don't get paid any money for it, which for Westerners seems crazy, but it's a culture. And there's a culture of 996, whereas you should work 9 to 9, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. And people are like, well, I don't mind doing that so much if it gets me somewhere. I can further my career, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm running around on a wheel. Sisyphean struggle, yeah? So a lot of them are just like getting really low paid jobs so they can lie flat, and creating their own aesthetic space and time and signing out of that like 996 culture. And they might even live with their parents so they can do it and just do what they want to do in life, which might well be something like Gauny or might be nothing. To get away from that kind of ideology of a productive time, which is a time of the consensus, maybe to not produce, not to do anything. And that's a form of dissensus as well, okay? And because it's not political in China, they don't get any flack for that, although they do online when they post memes and stuff. Sometimes they have to try and dodge the restrictions. So dissensus can be many things. It's not always this hardcore, like the civil rights movement, which was an amazing form of dissensus and presupposition of quality. It's not always that extreme. It can just be like, I'm going to stop working so hard and get a part-time job or a more quiet job where I can. It's a form of dissensus against the consensus for productive time. Yeah, you're buying out of the neoliberal idea of the good life. Yeah, which is to work as hard as you can and get in debt and so on and so forth. Yeah, we know we're living it. So I kind of agree with you, but it depends, because dissensus can be very dangerous depending what forms of dissensus you carry out. But it can be as simple as just changing your life. Just changing your life, yeah. So we could even say Thoreau, right? Walden Pond, in a way, was a form of dissensus, right? We could say that. So, and that's where my focus lays on more on practices as an everyday way of life that incorporates both, you know, Rancière's work and Foucault, which you have yet the pleasure to read, but I'm sure with David you will, because he's a Foucault expert. So I don't know if that answers your question, Matt, or was I a bit long-winded there? I don't know if you want to ask anything.
That was good, thanks. I've got more, but I'll come back in a bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Thank you. All right, then. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to do that, Matt, and come back. But Hans, you wanted to ask something? Yeah.
Yes, Stuart. Regarding the gig economy and where we are with that right now, there was the term entrepreneurship of the self was in that paper, and that was something to be avoided, I think. And we have Byung-Chul Han talking about with intrapreneurship and being, we're all entrepreneurs now in this gig economy. The master is inside of us, which is even worse than having a master outside. And we've got Jean Baudrillard in The Perfect Crime saying, you know, it's bad enough to be subject to somebody else's will, but the worst thing is to be subject to one's own will, right? I mean, I'm not sure what they mean by these things, but you know, as far as entrepreneurship of the self being a bad thing for Gauny, and for Byung-Chul Han, where do we stand with that? Because we have the gig economy on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have a movement like Mr. Money Mustache and the Mustachians, and we've got these young retirement people who like Gauny live on a very restricted economy, you know, minimal expenses, so they can have the money, so they don't have to work, so they have the time. And who was it who said that? Let's see. Gauny's texts taught Rancière that emancipation begins with the incredible act of taking the time that you don't have. And so these people are getting enough money to retire, and they're not working anymore, or they'll still do things for money, but they have enough money that they don't have to anymore, and they are taking the time they have now. And this is different than the gig economy.
Yeah. So, well read. You seem to have thoroughly read the essay. Good man. So let's give a little nod to Foucault, because entrepreneur of the self stems from Foucault. He was the one who coined that term quite early as well, when he was talking about neoliberal rumblings in one of his lectures, the name of which escapes me, but I'm sure David would know. Yeah, I mean, David's a Foucault man. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think getting enough money to retire and so on and so forth could even be part of the neoliberal dream. And good luck to you if you can do it in this harsh world that's becoming more and more harsh, and actually returning in places like the gig economy, like all of these laws that we fought for over the years before, like the time of Gauny to now, that we fought for to protect the worker, are now taken away in the gig economy because there's loopholes, right? You're working online, or you're working through an agency, I can fire you like this. So we're returning to that time of Gauny, unfortunately, and the vast disparities in wealth as well. And one could also argue the disappearance of the middle class, and we're just going to end up with like the Victorian era, the poor and the rich. So, I mean, it's tricky, especially if you've got like a family and children to look after. You can't be like Gauny, right? Who's a single guy. But we all do what we do to be workaholics. So all of you guys here, I'm sure you're all working really hard in full-time jobs, and you're giving your time, your precious time, to do an MA. Why? I know I don't make any money from this, so I don't know if you can, right? It's not for money, right? So why are you doing that? Yeah, and I would say that leans towards the side of the poet, the changing oneself. Okay, that's all we can do, change ourselves. Now, we could say if enough people do this, then we can change the world. But I would say that's too idealistic and leaning towards, we know what these utopian dreams lead to. They don't lead to a good place. Okay. So we can only focus rather on the transcendental of like huge shifts on the immanent. And that's what we're doing. We're grounding ourselves immanently in life, but at the same time trying to change ourselves and emancipate ourselves from the skins that are imposed upon us of taxonomy, to escape those, right, and create ourselves and experience ourselves as other, and in doing so experiment with that, as well as with these other space and times. For example, like the Chinese lying flat movement, it might just seem something simple, but you kind of signed out of that. You don't buy into that anymore, and you're living the life that you want to do, whether that's just lying flat and doing nothing and getting away from a time of production, or if you want to be like Gauny and become autodidactic, or or what you guys are doing, getting an MA and maybe going into a PhD, I don't know. So he doesn't really offer, you talk about the gig economy, he's not Rancière offering like Marx an economic revolution, or even a political one, political not in the form of dissensus, but the standard one. I would say, Rancière doesn't say this, but I would say like Foucault is offering a ontological revolution, okay? But Rancière calls it an aesthetic revolution. But to me, it's an ontological revolution. I don't know if you would agree with that, David, with Foucault. It's a form of an ontological revolution, if you like. Not a mass one, but an ontology of the self that can spread out to other people in that which Rancière calls aesthetic communities. Okay.
If I could just abuse my position as chair here, so to speak, and just jump in with a follow-up question on that. I'd be interested to know if you share this view about what we learn. I suppose about what we learn from Rancière and Gauny about this. You were just saying there very clearly that, look, this is if we engage in dissensus, an aesthetic practice of some kind, as you described it here, that this is not about changing everything. This is not about a revolution. This is we can't expect to change the world and so on. Yeah. Right? So we can focus on our own practices. It seems to me, however, that I suppose the way I would read what's going on here is with a slightly different emphasis. And I think you come to this when you talk about the questions of effects of this with respect to community and kind of collective life. Well, I just want to maybe nudge you in that direction, maybe see what you think. That there's a danger, it seems to me, in polarizing this to the point where we change everything in some grand revolution, or in effect we change nothing and we just find our own little space. We just find our own little, and that could be. I mean, I actually don't think that was what Epicurus. I don't think that was what Epicurus was doing in the idea of the garden. But but sometimes he's accused of that. Just retreat from society. Don't engage in all those things. Just work on the things that you can. Now, it seems to me that actually first of all, that might almost be not ambitious enough, even given the fact that we're not aiming for revolution, but also just not actually giving enough credit to the effects that way of conducting yourself can have on others, the world around you, and so on. Because by doing that, you do just create little cracks and fissures and rearrangements of the order of space and time, as you have been talking about it, the way in which the sensible is distributed. And so it's more than just looking after our own little times and spaces.
Of course, I mean, we haven't.
I wonder if you'd agree with that, Stuart.
No, I totally agree. And we haven't had the chance to go into aesthetic communities, which are more like Jean-Luc Nancy's idea of sort of inoperative communities. They're community without communities. They're non-locational, and they're kind of like temporary solidarities. And maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but we could give the example of the Occupy movements, like the Occupy movement of like Wall Street, for example. That could be a temporary location example of aesthetic community, as could the lying flat movement in China online, where these memes and it's non-locational and people connect in this lying flat movement through online. Gauny is another example in the community there of worker poets. People write for the worker newspapers and so on. These are all aesthetic communities. But I would say briefly, David, and this you're like, because it leans towards Michel Serres and so on. In a new essay on Rancière that I have, it's under submission at the moment with a journal. What I do is I say that aesthetic emancipation is a contingency, okay? It's a contingency, in my words, against the non-contingent fact that society functions on inequality, okay? It's a non-contingent fact. Rancière and Foucault believe it's never going to change. There's always going to be forms of inequality or lack of freedom in society. So, of course, these can make changes, David, but it's ongoing and it will keep on going. There's no telos, there's no end. There'll always be a need. Some societies have less inequality than others, okay? But there's always inequality and there's always lack of freedom, be it ontological or otherwise. So in that sense, there are, of course, David, there are effects, but it's much like, let's go to Epicurus, because in the same essay, I place dissensus in an Epicurean atomistic framework, where dissensus acts like the swerve of the atoms, and as you know, David, there's a contingency there, right? We don't know.
Okay. That was very nice. I had no idea you were doing that in the essay, but that's nicely brought together. Okay.
Can't get away from Lucretius. There's no escape.
Very good. All right, thank you for that. That's interesting. So any other thoughts or questions? Was there anything, Hans? Yes, go on, and then come on.
Well, we were going to come back to Matt, I think. So
yes.
I was waiting to see if Matt would raise a hand.
I'm trying to put this in order. To some extent, I think you've touched on it, but this idea of to what extent the dissensus needs to be. Some of the examples you were giving there were dissensus, but they were defined in terms of not the main system. So there were
disruption of the main system.
So my question is, to what extent does it have to be a complete departure, and to what extent you have talked about this a little bit, but to what extent is it this kind of almost Nietzschean playing with that idea of what is available to create something different that's disruptive, or is it all of it?
What do you mean? I just want you to. What do you mean by a Nietzschean playing with something that's different? Can you just qualify that for me?
I'm reading The Gay Science by Nietzsche, and it's lots of stuff about playing with, taking what's there and taking it apart and putting it back together and being kind of creative,
reconfiguring
artistic.
The sensible, right?
Exactly.
A reconfiguration.
One thing is needful.
So I mean, it's late and I'm tired. So let's just go back. So you playing that reconfiguring. What was it you just said? Okay. So for example, Rancière gives a simple example of Gauny daydreaming at work, and in that moment, it's a sense of space and predominantly of time. When Gauny's finished his hard day of work, in those days, people were doing 12, 14 hours. He'd go home and instead of resting, he would study and sleep. Now that's a form of dissensus because you're disrupting that dialectic of work and rest. So there's many forms of dissensus, but anything that basically in a crude nutshell reconfigures the consensual configuration of the sensible, space, time, your identity that's imposed upon you, right? Because Rancière is like Foucault is all about a de-identification. It's not about identity politics where you take on the identity imposed upon you. It's about de-identification is a form of dissensus. So Matt, I realized, for me it was the same. It sounds very abstract and so on and so forth. But please trust me when I say it's very much grounded in everyday practices. So either if you read my book or if you go to Rancière himself and read that, I think you'll have a much deeper understanding than perhaps my lack of being articulate can express here in this moment. But it is, to be fair, Matt, David would agree, we're packing in a lot here. There's a lot that could be unpacked, and it's a lot to take in, and it's hard for you to take in, and maybe it's hard for me to explain as well. But dissensus is quite a wide spectrum. But basically, anything that reconfigures space, time, and the self as essential against the consensus. So we talk about as well, don't we, heterotopias, other places, right? Not utopias, but heterotopias. We talk about heterochronies, other times, and not in this essay, but Rancière talks about the heterochrone as well, which is the self as other. And all of this together creates this kind of mechanism of emancipation that you can use as an individual to try to emancipate yourself from the aesthetics imposed upon you in some kind of ontological aesthetic revolution. But at the same time, that can connect you to other people. And we can see that in the form of the Chinese lying flat movement, which you can Google. It's well known. And, even like the, Occupy movements as well, as examples of aesthetic communities, which, as we said, are non-locational and are temporary solidarities, right? They form and they deliquesce, okay? Which kind of, again, goes, David would probably say, towards Michel Serre, this idea of flow and movement and so on, based on Lucretian atomism, which is making a huge comeback, I would say, at the moment, David. Wouldn't you agree? This idea of atomism and movement and so on, and new understandings of what emancipation itself is, a revolution is, and this is what Rancière and Foucault both offer, a new understanding, right? Rather than what we've lived with of revolution, a standard understanding of revolution and equality and freedom, which, unfortunately didn't really always go to good places. So it's a word dissensus, but it's also vast. But in a nutshell, it's disruption of the consensus, if that makes sense. If you really want to, you can read Rancière's book, Disagreement, which is where he conceptualizes the experimental historiography that he did in the Knights of Labour, which talks about Gauny and the work of poets. And then he comes with his terms, politics and aesthetics, and that would be a great book to read that would maybe give you a good grounding in what he means by dissensus. Or you can go out and read Todd May's book. My other supervisor, Oliver Davis, he's got a great book out on Rancière as well. So it's quite hard to grasp with just this small talk, I would say. Not impossible, but and hard for me to convey as well. I'm like David, I'm not a lecturer, so I'm inexperienced. So yeah.
Done a great job there, Stuart. Matt, yes, do you want to follow up there?
Sorry, yeah, I don't want to hog it. I've got a million questions, and I will go away and read on this. But to what degree is this approach an alternative, a replacement for the traditional engagement with the politics and trying to campaign for change? Is it instead of, or is it a mix, or is it agnostic? It's just saying that there's this other thing.
Well, for Rancière and Foucault as well, as I said, they society it's always going to be unequal, right? But of course, it goes hand in hand. I mean, like Rancière and Foucault both supported May 68. Okay, they weren't against it. Civil rights. Of course, we need this implementation, but this is just an alternative form. It's not, as David said, a Kierkegaardian either or. Okay, yeah. We can have both, and they can go hand in hand. This real shift isn't really from forms of civil rights and improving life. It's more to do with it was a response to the whole wave of Marxism in the 20th century. That when we became aware of what was going on in China and the USSR, people like Foucault, Baudrillard, Rancière, and others. What new forms of revolution come, and then it's an aesthetic, but of course it goes hand in hand with other things. We don't just say this is the only way to do it and this is the way it is, because that's what the 19th century form of revolution was saying, right? We've got to do this and we've got to take over and it's going to be a coup, and then someone gets put in power and the same old thing goes all over again. Or even worse, if you look at communism in the communist countries, it was much worse. No, it isn't. Of course, it goes hand in hand with civil rights and so on and so forth. But Rancière and Foucault are very much, of course, it expands, but are very much for the individual. So if it feels very individual orientated, it is, but it does expand communally. For Foucault, it would be through a term called poesia, which is like a truth speaking. For Rancière, it would be called aesthetic practices. I mean, I'm going to stop now because I could go on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to. Well, I do want to, but I don't think David wants me to. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah, we could go on for a long time, but I'm also a little mindful that it's very late at night for you there in China, and we don't want to keep you too long.
My beauty sleep.
Yeah. Hans, did you have a last question or observation you wanted to raise?
I'll try to make my question more succinct than the last one. So I've been a remote worker for the years since the start of the pandemic, and that opens possibilities to being out away from the watchful eye of the panoptic master. But there are companies, I've read about this, even at the senior vice president level, they are surveilled every minute to be at their computer, to be active with the mouse, to be, it'll photograph people every so often. And as it becomes, I mean, I've never worked under those conditions, but I only expect those conditions to become more common. And so it's going to get harder and harder to find the interstices in which you can, enjoy the garden out the window of the opulent house that you're laying the floor in.
This man's read that essay. He's a good reader. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I'm like, so for example, the COVID pandemic, COVID was a good example of that pushed many people where when they were off of work, they were like, actually, do I want to go to work again? I don't think so. And that's where the lying flat movement come from China. It started with that. And it's worldwide, right? They don't call it lying flat movement, but it's a similar feeling. I don't want to work anymore. I want to do this. Some people can't do that because like maybe they've got family, they've got this, they've got kids. But for a lot of people who can do that, they buy out of the neoliberal dream where you're making as much money as possible to buy the things you don't really need, right? So like it's echoes of Thoreau, right? If you're American, right? Everyone knows Thoreau in America, Walden Pond. So there is no real answer, and this is why, like Foucault and Rancière, rather than imposing an answer on you, like other thinkers do, right? It's revolution. Come on, workers of the world, unite. They're saying this is an auto-emancipation, an emancipation of the self, and rather than allowing a didactic theorist to tell you this is how it is and this is what you need to do, you have to be autodidactic and tell yourself and create your own form of emancipation, an emancipation of the self by the self. There is no
although
answer.
Presumably that is something which you can share with others. It's not, you don't have to.
As we said, the lying flat movement is shared communally online.
That's something which develops with lots of people sort of supporting each other and contributing to one another.
Aesthetic communities. For example, with Gauny, you had the worker newspapers, people writing there about their life, their poetry, people have meetings. It's not a community that's like, locational, but of course that can expand. Yeah, of course. But it is primarily an emancipation of the self.
I can really hear the weight of Hans's question. However, that with the development of technology, which is just tracking us in different ways, both in terms of working lives, as you said, Hans, it might take photographs of your laptop or track how many movements your mouse is making or something. Through to just having the way we spend money and move about being tracked by using our bank cards and so on and so on, all these sorts of things, that it makes it potentially more difficult to find those spaces in between, which I guess, and this is, I'm just putting, I haven't really thought this through especially, but I guess that sort of makes the challenge all the greater, but for thinking along the lines which Rancière and Gauny are describing, but also the stakes, in as much as it's harder simply to find a little recess to go back to. So creating that sort of space, it might require real ingenuity, some courage, some interventions to really break open spaces and times like that, because there won't be so many quiet evenings and days between work to take up as there were for Gauny.
Yeah, it's a similar time in the vast disparities of wealth and lack of like protection workers' rights, but at the same time it's a very different time. It's like as Hans pointed out, that the panoptician is technologically advanced.
Yes.
So but I don't know. Again, that's an individual thing. Is there a way to break out into a job where you're not so observed, or you create your own niche of self-employment or so on? But I know it's hard in the gig economy. Times are hard. There's no two ways about it. So but what's the answer? We have a revolution and someone else comes in power, and then what? The wheel keeps turning. So as I said, this is really an offering of economic answers or revolution. It's purely aesthetic. So obviously that's going to go hand in hand with other things.
Yeah. Look, I think that would be a great place to draw the discussion to a close. And to Stuart, thank you so much for doing this. It's a really interesting body of work. Bringing Rancière is under discussed and under talked about and presented, so it's great to have you talking about that. Gauny, such an interesting character and almost not discussed at all. So it's even better that you're bringing him to our attention. And yeah, thank you for being here and talking about it with us. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for the hands, Matt, everyone else who turned up, and I wish you best of luck on your MA. I know I really enjoyed my MA with David. I'm sure you do too. So best of luck.
Thank you. I'm in the home stretch. I'm feeling the crunch.
Wow. Oh, okay. You can do it. I believe in you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You're an inspiration, Stuart.
You'll get there, Hans.
Yeah, maybe.
You'll get there. Don't you
worry.
PhD
next for your hands. Don't relax.
We'll see you.
I thought about that. That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Do it.
We'll see you over that line. Don't you worry.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll stop the recording in a moment, and then I'll make the recording available to everybody. I can't remember the best way to do this exactly, but I will, and you'll know where it is if you want to go back and listen to anything again, and I'll make it available for everyone else, because I know there's quite a few people who would like to have been here had their kind of work and life commitments made that possible. But yeah, okay. Stuart, thank you again, and
okay,
we will no doubt be in touch and speak soon, and maybe you can come back and talk to us again about your new paper when that's out. That'd be great.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay,
all right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.